Welcome to the second part of the AR Basecamp challenge. So in the first part we explained what variables are, and we explained different types of variables, strings and numbers. So if we go back to this challenge, you can see in the code here, you may now be able to recognize that this n value is actually an integer, and this string value is this string variable is actually a string, and this whole line here is a function declaration, which is what I'm going to explain now. So if we go back to your playgrounds and carry on below, I hope you've got playgrounds. It really makes it a lot simpler just to play around with code and learn with it. So if you look at the challenge here, we've got something n:int, string colon string. Okay, so that is just explicitly declaring this string as a string and this n number as an integer. So we could do that here as well. So if I add on string, then we are now saying that str is of type string. But the compiler or the Xcode knows that because hello playground is a string and it assumes that. And we can also write that here as well. And we write int, and we're explicitly telling Xcode that number is an int, so it doesn't have to guess it. And that's just a little explanation for what you see in this function declaration with these things that are called parameters, which I will explain to you now. So a function is basically a collection of statements or instructions that you want to group together for some reason, and they basically achieve one simple goal. And this is what this challenge is about. It's a function that is going to repeat a string n number of times. So how do we write a function? You write func, and then our function is going to be called something much simpler. Print a string. Notice I use something called camel case, where the first character of a name is a lower letter, and then all the other first letters of the next words in this function name are capitals, and it's called camel case. It's a convention. So we're going to print a string onto the screen. After you've written your keyword func, which defines that what comes next is a function, you write the name, and then you write an opening and a closing bracket, and then you write an opening and then a closing squiggly bracket. So there's two types of brackets here. So that's how you declare a very simple function that doesn't do anything yet, because we put all the things that we want to do in this function inside of these brackets. So what we want to do in this function is print a string, and the string we're going to pass in as a parameter. So a parameter is basically a value that you pass in when you call your function. So for example, in maths, there are mathematical functions to work out things like x squared, for example. I suppose you could say that is a function, and the value x is whatever we choose to pass into that function. And if we pass the number 2 into that function, when we get the number 4 out, because 2 squared is 4. And it's exactly the same here. It's no different. So the first thing we need to do is give our parameter a name. So print a string. So we're going to call it a string. Again, I use camel case. And then we're going to give this parameter a type. So we write a colon and then space, and then we're going to give it the type string, which is what we had before here. So now we've got a function with a name and a parameter of type string. And now we're going to print that parameter onto the screen. And we do that in the same way we were printing out this number and this string before. You just write print, and then you write the name of your parameter here. So I'm going to write the name of the parameter that I've passed in here, and then when we call this function, we should print a string. We're not actually calling this function yet, so we need to do that. It's very simple to do that. You write print a string, and you can see that I haven't even completed writing the name of it, but the Swift program or Xcode, it knows that there's a function called this, and it comes up and it suggests that you need to call this function. So I click that, and it auto completes it, and then it highlights the parameter value that I have to fill in, and that can be anything I want, just like x squared. It can be anything I want to pass into x. So I'm going to write my name, Ben, and now the program will run. It will call this function, and you can see here it's printed out the name Ben down here. Or we can write something else like hello world. So print a string function is now calling here, passing hello world in as a parameter, and then printing that parameter out onto the screen, and then we have it printed here. So that is the concepts of functions. If we look back at the challenge quickly, let's analyze what's here. You can see here we've got a keyword func, and then we've got the name of the function, and then we've got our first parameter. Now you may be a bit confused here. Why is there an underscore? Well, in Swift, you can silence the name of a parameter. Don't worry too much about that for now. Just pay more attention to this part. This is just the challenge, and it's not 100% necessary to understand that underscore character to solve that challenge. But just know that this is the first parameter, n, and it's of type int, and this is the second parameter, string. I don't think that's a very good name for a parameter because you can confuse that name with this type of variable. But that's the challenge that is on this website, and the name of that parameter is string, and it's of type string. And then after this, there's an arrow or a hyphen and a pointer, and it's pointing to a variable type. Well, you might wonder, what does that mean? Well, functions not only can take in values, but they can also pass values back. And this is the point of this function. It is to return a string and print it n number of times onto the screen. So this function is returning something, and we can simply do that with our function. If I add an arrow, and I'm going to return a string, and then you get a little error here. The error says it's missing a return. So if you say that your function returns something, you have to write return at the end of the function, and then you have to return whatever you've defined here. It's a bit pointless, but we could return a string, and then we could add on something else like hello. So we're going to take in this string as a parameter, we're going to print the string out onto the screen, and then we're going to return the string passed in plus the word hello. And what you think, where does it return it to? Well, it returns it to the line that calls the function. So we can actually store the result of a function. We can store what is returned from that function in a variable. So I'm going to create a variable. It's going to be called returned result, and then I'm going to print out return result onto the screen. And you can see here it's printed out the return result, which is hello world plus hello. So play around with that and try and understand that very basic function, and then hopefully you can join me in the next video. And in the next video we're going to look at for loops and how we can use a for loop to do the same thing several different times. Okay, thank you.